it's important for people to understand who it is behind bars. When we look in the media, they tell us, oh, well, these are the bad people. These are the people that aren't like you. And I think what I've learned more than anything is I am just like them, and they are just like me. We just had different chances, different opportunities. People are so much more than their worst moment.
That is an excerpt from an interview with 2023 MacArthur Fellow Andrea Armstrong, who is an incarceration law scholar bringing transparency to detention policies, conditions of confinement, and deaths in U.S. prisons and jails. Her research, legal writings, and advocacy are rooted in incarcerated people's experiences in Louisiana, but the influence of her work is much broader. In this episode, we go in depth with Andrea to learn more about her work, and her exceptional creativity. Let's hear more from her interview.
If you're incarcerated, you are living 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, under a regime that has enormous power and authority over you, over your body, over what you drink, what you eat, how you dress, over every aspect of your life. So when we think about prisons and jails, it is really this gap between government power being at the highest that it could ever be and individual rights being at the lowest that it could ever be. And within that space, within that gap, that is where abuse occurs. That is where we disregard the humanity of one another. And that is why it is critically important to shine a light in those spaces. In prisons and jails, these are toxic environments, right? So think about the lack of ventilation, the lack of access to sunlight. Think about the constant noise. I'm always struck when I go into a facility, there's gates clanging, there's alarms, there's walkie-talkies going off, there's voices, and it's all within a space that is concrete and cinder block, and so none of the noise is absorbed. The entire environment itself can be harmful to a person's health. And when I was sitting with a friend of mine who's now passed away, Glenn Ford, he was telling me about the ways in which that they would clean the tier by running sewage from one end of the tier down to the other. And they wouldn't do it with any warning for people. And so he would just hear, get your stuff off the floor, get your stuff off the floor. And so they would all run and grab their stuff off so that it wasn't flooded with human waste. And then they would all be given these chemicals that were so harsh that when they put them on the wall, it would make the paint blister. But they weren't given gloves or any masks to mask the fumes from these really harsh chemicals to clean after the sewage. He would talk about the rust in the water. He would talk about the burn pit that was right outside of his cell and how he couldn't even leave his cell to escape the smoke. What we know is that racial minorities in the U.S. are overrepresented in the prison and jail population. They are over-policed, and they are over-sentenced, and they are over-incarcerated. So when we think about lack of access to adequate health care, forced labor, these environmentally toxic conditions, the people who bear a disproportionate burden for those conditions are in fact racial minorities. Everybody who's inside belongs to somebody outside, and they belong to a community outside. So if we are seeing a higher rate of deaths among racial minorities due to some of these conditions behind bars, that means that communities on the outside are experiencing a disproportionate burden of death simply because of how race and justice intersect in this country. Years and years ago, I worked on a project with the Promise of Justice Initiative, and we were looking at deaths that occurred in East Baton Rouge Parish Prison, and there were parents asking, is my son the only one to die this way? So we went to go see, and we started compiling lists of people who had died. And it became clear to me that it wasn't just a problem at East Baton Rouge Parish Prison, that in fact it was a problem for every single prison and jail in Louisiana, that there was no one keeping track of who was dying behind bars, from what types of causes. Journalists would call me and say, well, is this the third or the fourth suicide in the last year? And I thought, well, why are they calling me? Shouldn't we have an official government source? You know, if we have a jail where people are dying week after week, that seems like pretty important information to keep track of. If we want to prevent deaths, we need to know why people are dying and where they're dying. My students and I at Loyola designed the Incarceration Transparency Project. It is a website that includes a database and memorials that is dedicated to shining a light behind bars. Families often get in touch with me. Some of them have contacted me to say that they found their son's name in the database, and it was the first time that they had gotten records of how their child died. But what that also means is that when they Google their child's name, the first thing that pops up is a record of their death, or a description of the charges, or their conviction. But people are so much more than their worst moment, and their families know this. Their families know that they are football fans, they are caretakers, they are artists, they are musicians. They are people who had jobs, who were brothers and siblings and uncles and aunts. And all of that goes missing when somebody dies behind bars. Instead, all we know, if we know anything at all, is that they were accused of certain charges and they died in a particular way. So what we do in our memorial section is we try and document what we lost, what communities lose, what families lose, and how important that is for remembrance. It's important for people to understand who it is behind bars. When we look in the media, they tell us that, oh, well, these are the bad people. These are the people that, aren't like you. And I think what I've learned more than anything is I am just like them, and they are just like me. We just had different chances, different opportunities, but at our core, we are the same. We lock up in this country an enormous amount of talent. The things that I've learned from people who are behind bars are irreplaceable. There is wisdom there is intelligence, and we're cut off from it. We're cut off from the richness of who we are. Not one of the people in our data set was sentenced to death. Not one. And so that's where my energy is focused, is on saving lives today. But there is a bigger and broader conversation that needs to happen. Behind bars in the US is like a black hole of law. There are policies and practices and their own regulation, but all of the other laws that we're used to that structure our world, our work, our existence don't apply. And that's problematic. In a democratic country, we should always be concerned when the government can act unilaterally with wide discretion and authority upon people who have no rights or very few rights to contest government power. These are our jails and prisons. They are operated in our name, and they are therefore our responsibility. We should look at who we are and think really hard about whether it matches who we want to be.
Andrea Armstrong is affiliated with Loyola University New Orleans College of Law, where she is currently the Dr. Norman C. Francis Distinguished Professor of Law. The Incarceration Transparency Project that she created with her students is the first publicly available statewide database on deaths in custody in the United States. The MacArthur Fellows program identifies and supports extraordinarily creative individuals with a track record of excellence who demonstrate the ability to impact society in significant and beneficial ways through their pioneering work. To learn more, visit us at macfound.org.